to draw his sword, he found he could only pull it out halfway. His wounded arm was too weak. That was the signal for the final attack. The warriors pressed in, sensing the kill. One knocked his helmet from his head. Another slashed his left leg with a large native sword, a campion, causing Magellan to fall face down into the water. In that moment, he was helpless. The warriors descended on him, hacking and stabbing with spears and swords until he was dead. On April 7, 1521, a man who had stared into the abyss and survived, anchored his ships off a tropical port. He was Ferdinand Magellan, a captain who'd crushed mutinies, navigated a treacherous strait, and crossed an ocean so vast it broke all the maps. When he formally entered the port of Cebu the next day, he was met by a powerful local ruler, Rajah Humabon. Incredibly, within a week, this ruler and 800 of his people would bow not only to Magellan's Spanish king, but to his god. A cross was planted, hundreds were baptized, and Magellan, the weary explorer, was transformed. He wasn't just a captain anymore. He was a divine instrument, a kingmaker, a figure of such power that he seemed to touch the heavens. For all intents and purposes, he was a god. Yet just 42 days later, on April 27th, that god was a corpse. His body, pierced by spears and hacked by native swords, lay face down in the warm, shallow water of a bloody beach. His men, the soldiers who had followed him across the world, watched from their ships, unable or unwilling to get his body back. His authority, once absolute, had vanished. He was a ghost, his body left behind as a gruesome trophy of war. How did this happen? How, in the span of a mere 6 weeks, did Ferdinand Magellan go from a celebrated figure in a new land to a forgotten casualty on a bloody shore? This wasn't just a battle gone wrong, it was a rapid, spectacular downfall, a tragedy built on political miscalculation, profound cultural blindness, and a fatal, all-consuming hubris. This is the story of those 42 days. To understand Magellan's godlike status in Cebu, you first have to understand the hell he'd just been through. His expedition, 5 ships and over 260 men, had left Spain in 1519. They weren't looking for the Philippines. They were trying to find a westward route to the Spice Islands. The journey had been one disaster after another. He faced a violent mutiny in Patagonia, a revolt he crushed by executing one of his own captains and marooning another. He navigated the winding, treacherous strait that now bears his name, a passage that took 38 grueling days and cost him a ship to desertion. Then came the Pacific, an ocean of horrifying emptiness. For 99 days they saw nothing but water. Scurvy ripped through the crew, their gums swelled, their teeth fell out, and their bodies were covered in sores. The expedition's chronicler, Antonio Pigafetta, wrote of their desperation. They ate biscuits that had turned to maggot-infested powder, drank yellow, stinking water, and gnawed on the leather off the ship's rigging. Men died, their bodies dropped into the vast, indifferent ocean. When they finally hit Guam on March 6, 1521, they were ghosts of men, starved and haunted and on the verge of collapse. 10 days later, they sighted the island of Samar in what would become the Philippines. For the desperate crew, it was paradise. They landed on the uninhabited island of Hominhan to recover, finding fresh water and food. It was here that the first threads of Magellan's downfall were woven not with violence, but with hospitality. On March 28th, they moved to the island of Limasawa, where they met 2 brother chieftains, Rajah Humabon and Rajah Siawi. This wasn't a meeting of conqueror and conquered. It was a cautious, diplomatic dance. Magellan gave them gifts. He learned about the local politics, a complex web of shifting alliances and rivalries between dozens of chiefdoms or barangays. He saw that these rulers weren't a unified front, they were competitors. On Easter Sunday, March 31st, Magellan held the first Catholic Mass in the history of the Philippines. For him, it was a sacred act, claiming the land for his god, but it was also a show of power, a demonstration of spiritual authority he believed was greater than any local king. Guided by Rajah Humabon, Magellan headed for the real prize, the port of Cebu. It was the biggest and most powerful trading hub in the region, ruled by Rajah Humabon. When Magellan's fleet arrived on April 7th, the first day of his transformation, the welcome wasn't exactly warm. An official of Humabon's court boarded their ship and demanded that the newcomers pay tribute to the Rajah. Magellan refused. He'd just survived the edge of the world. He wasn't about to bow to anyone. Through his Malay interpreter, Enrique Man from Malacca, who was himself a crucial and ultimately tragic figure in this story, Magellan made it clear he served the King of Spain, the most powerful monarch on earth, and paid tribute to no one. To make his point, he had his men fire the ship's cannons, a thunderous roar that shook the harbor. The message was clear: he wasn't just another trader, he was a military force. Rajah Humabon was a smart political operator. His power was big, but not absolute. He had rivals. These heavily armed foreigners were both a threat and a huge opportunity. A merchant in the court warned Humabon, telling him these were the same men who had conquered territory in India and Malacca. But Humabon saw it differently. He saw a powerful ally he could use to crush his enemies and cement his own rule. A formal alliance was made. To seal it, the two leaders performed a blood compact, a local ritual where they each drew blood, mixed it with wine, and drank it. It was a powerful symbol of brotherhood. For a moment, Magellan showed a willingness to engage with local customs, but this gesture of respect would soon be swallowed by a rigid certainty in his own world as superiority. The alliance was made. The stage was set. Magellan, the tired captain, was now a king's partner. His rise had begun. The alliance between Magellan and Humabon was a marriage of convenience. Magellan needed supplies and a base for Spanish influence. Humabon wanted to be the undisputed king of the region, and he saw Magellan's cannons as the key. The peak of this new pact came just a week after Magellan's arrival. On April 14, 1521, a grand ceremony took place. In a plaza in Cebu, a large cross was erected, and Magellan and his priests started baptizing the locals. Rajah Humabon went first. He was given the name Carlos after the Spanish king. His wife Rajah Humabon was named Juana. Following their leaders, hundreds of Cebuanos lined up. According to primary accounts, around 800 were converted in a matter of days. To Magellan, this was more than a political win. It was a spiritual triumph. It was divine proof. He hadn't just survived the Pacific. God had chosen him to bring salvation to these lands. He saw the mass conversion not as a political move by Humabon, but as a genuine miracle. His success ballooned his confidence into dangerous hubris. He wasn't just an explorer for a king anymore. He was an agent of God's will, and he believed God's will was absolute. The first cracks in his power appeared almost right away. High on success, Magellan made a new demand. All the new Christians had to burn their old religious idols. For many, this was a step too far. It was one thing to accept a new god who came with powerful friends. It was another to desecrate the old ones. There was resistance, a quiet unease that Magellan either didn't see or chose to ignore. He saw their hesitation not as a complex cultural response, but as a simple lack of faith. His conviction was only deepened by what seemed to be another miracle. A relative of Humabon, who was gravely ill, was on his deathbed. Magellan declared that if the man got baptized, he would instantly recover. The man agreed, was baptized, and, according to Pigafetta, suddenly got better. For Magellan, this was the ultimate proof. His God was a God of power. This event solidified his belief that he was on a righteous crusade and dangerously raised the stakes. Any failure from now on wouldn't just be a military defeat. It would be a failure of his God. It was in this atmosphere of supreme self-confidence that a new name entered the story, one that would become Magellan's doom: Lapu-Lapu. Lapu was one of two chieftains on the small nearby island of Mactan. While the other chief, Zula, had signaled he would submit to the new order, Lapu-Lapu was defiant. He refused to convert. He refused to pay tribute to Humabon. He refused to acknowledge the authority of these strange visitors. His reasons were likely complex, maybe a long-standing rivalry with Humabon, or a deep distrust of the newcomers. Some sources say the real issue was Magellan's demand that all chiefs submit to Humabon's leadership, something a proud rival like Lapu-Lapu could never do. Whatever the reason, his defiance was a direct challenge to the new power structure Magellan thought he had built. Lapu-Lapu became the test case. For Humabon, crushing him was essential to show all the other chiefs that resistance was futile. He went to Magellan, framing Lapu-Lapu's defiance as an insult to them both. Here Magellan stood at a crossroads. He could have been cautious. He could have used his ship's cannons to intimidate Lapu-Lapu from a safe distance. He could have sent a few of his men to support a larger Cebuano force. He could have let Humabon fight his own battle. But Magellan's hubris, fed by a week of what he saw as divine success, wouldn't allow it. He took Lapu-Lapu's defiance personally. It was an insult to his authority, a stain on his honor, and a challenge to his God. He made a fateful, arrogant decision. He told Humabon to stand aside. He and his men would handle it. In fact, he insisted that Humabon and his warriors do nothing but watch from their boats. He would personally lead a small force to Mactan and make an example of Lapu-Lapu. He would show his new allies what a real Christian soldier could do. He totally underestimated his enemy. and fatally overestimated himself. He was about to walk into a trap he'd built himself. From a military perspective, the plan to attack Mactan was pure arrogance. Magellan put together a force of only 60 men, including himself. 49 would be the landing party. He flat-out rejected Rajah Humabon's offer to bring his own warriors, who numbered in the hundreds if not thousands. According to Pigafetta, Magellan's orders were clear. Humabon and his men were to stay in their boats and simply watch how Europeans fought. This wasn't just a tactical mistake, it was a psychological one. Magellan was so convinced of European superiority he believed a small, well-armed force was invincible against what he saw as a native rabble with primitive weapons. He'd seen their wooden shields and fire-hardened spears and dismissed them. His goal wasn't just to win, it was to perform a spectacle of power so overwhelming that no one would ever dare defy him again. On the evening of April 26, the small force set out for Mactan. Under the cover of darkness, Magellan sent one last messenger to Lapu-Lapu. The message was an ultimatum: submit, or face the consequences. Lapu-Lapu's reply was pure defiance. As Pigafetta recorded it, the chieftain sent back a message saying that if the Spaniards had lances, so did they, of bamboo and hardened in the fire. He wasn't scared, he was ready. There was no turning back. Magellan had publicly committed to this fight. To back down now would be a huge loss of face, shattering the image of invincibility he'd worked so hard to build. His honor, and the honor of his king and God, were on the line. They arrived off the coast of Mactan 3 hours before dawn on April 27th, and it was here that Magellan, the master navigator, made a catastrophic mistake. He didn't know the local environment. The tide was low. The waters around Mactan were protected by coral reefs, creating a wide, shallow shelf. His ships, the floating fortresses with their devastating cannons, couldn't get anywhere near the shore. They were stuck more than 2 crossbow shots away, their biggest weapon rendered completely useless. That alone should have been enough to call off the attack. The cannons were his trump card. Without them, the entire battle was different. But Magellan, blinded by his goal, pushed forward. He ordered his men to disembark. The 49 soldiers, weighed down by metal armor, dropped into the shallow water, but the beach was still a long way off. They were forced to wade for what Pigafetta called the length of 2 crossbow flights, hundreds of yards through the dark, knee-deep water. Every step was a struggle on the uneven coral. The water slowed them down, making them clumsy and vulnerable. They were knights of Europe, trained for land battles, now struggling through a seascape that was completely alien to them. As the sun began to rise, they saw what was waiting for them on the shore. It wasn't a small band of frightened villagers. It was an army. Pigafetta estimated over 1,500 warriors. They were arranged in 3 divisions, an organized force. They were on their home turf, light on their feet, and perfectly adapted to the terrain. They just watched as the small group of armored men struggled slowly toward them. The god, stripped of his thunder, was walking right into the lion's den. As Magellan and his 48 men finally staggered onto the beach, they were met with a terrifying roar as the massive force of warriors surged forward. Magellan tried to organize his men, hoping their discipline and weapons would hold. He ordered his musketeers and crossbowmen to fire, but their shots were mostly useless. The distance was still too great, and the Mactan warriors weren't just standing there. They leaped hither and thither, as Pigafetta noted, making them hard to hit. Plus, their large wooden shields were surprisingly good at deflecting arrows and even slowing the lead balls from the muskets. The Spanish were pinned down, they couldn't advance, and a long, difficult retreat through the water lay behind them. The warriors of Mactan were fighting smart. Instead of charging the armored torsos of the Europeans, they aimed for their weak points. A storm of arrows, rocks, and bamboo spears rained down on the Spaniards, aimed right at their unarmored legs and arms. Seeing his ranged attacks failing, Magellan tried a cruel and desperate tactic. He sent a few men to burn the nearby village, hoping to terrorize the defenders. They managed to set fire to what Pigafetta guessed was 20 or 30 houses. But the plan backfired, spectacularly. The sight of their homes burning didn't create fear. It roused the warriors to greater fury. They redoubled their attack, a wave of righteous anger crashing down on the invaders, and then it happened. A warrior got close enough to strike Magellan. The accounts vary, but the consensus is that he was hit in the leg by a poisoned arrow. The god was bleeding. The psychological shock of this moment was immense. To his men, Magellan was an almost mythical figure of command. Seeing him wounded shattered their morale. For the Mactan warriors, the sight was electrifying. This powerful, armored invader wasn't invincible. He was mortal. Recognizing Magellan as the leader, the warriors swarmed him. He fought back like a cornered animal. Pigafetta, who was himself wounded, watched in horror. A native hurled a bamboo spear into the captain's face, he wrote, but the latter immediately killed him with his lance, which he left in the native's body. When Magellan tried to draw his sword, he found he could only pull it out halfway. His wounded arm was too weak. That was the signal for the final attack. The warriors pressed in, sensing the kill. One knocked his helmet from his head. Another slashed his left leg with a large native sword, a campion, causing Magellan to fall face down into the water. In that moment, he was helpless. The warriors descended on him, hacking and stabbing with spears and swords until he was dead. They slew our mirror, our light, our comfort, and our true guide, Pigafetta wrote. The sight of their leader being butchered broke what was left of the Spanish resistance. Panic set in. The remaining soldiers, many wounded, turned and fled, scrambling back through the water toward the distant boats where their Cebuano Alexander Magellan's own orders watched the slaughter unfold. They left their captain's body behind. The man who had promised to show them how Europeans fight had been cut down in the surf. The great circumnavigator, the iron-willed captain, died in the shallows of a foreign beach, abandoned by his men and defeated by an enemy he had fatally underestimated. His transformation was complete. The god of Cebu was now the ghost of Mactan. In the chaotic retreat, 8 Spaniards lay dead, including their captain general. The survivors, shocked and leaderless, straggled back to the ships. From the decks, they could only watch as the warriors of Mactan dragged Magellan's body away as a trophy of war. Desperate to recover their leader, the survivors tried to ransom his body, offering Lapu-Lapu as much merchandise as he wished. Lapu-Lapu refused. Magellan would have no grave. His body, like his authority, had been consumed by the islands. The news of the defeat spread like wildfire. The invincible Spaniards had been crushed. Their leader was dead. And for Rajah Humabon, the calculating ruler of Cebu, the political math changed instantly. His mighty European ally was gone, replaced by a band of demoralized survivors. His main rival Lapu-Lapu was now a victorious hero. The alliance with the Spaniards was no longer an asset. It was a liability. Humabon, ever the pragmatist, decided to cut his losses in the most brutal way possible. Just 4 days after the battle, on May 1, 1521, Humabon made his move. He invited the new leaders of the expedition, Duarte Barbosa and Juan Serrano, to a grand feast, promising to give them precious jewels for the King of Spain. Despite everything, and maybe clinging to the hope that the alliance was still intact, the Spanish leadership accepted. It was a fatal mistake. About 24 of the crew's most important members went ashore for the banquet. As they sat down to eat, they were ambushed. Humabon's warriors, their allies just days before, fell upon the unsuspecting Spaniards in a massacre. Pigafetta, who had been wounded at Mactan and wisely stayed on the ships, could only watch the horror from a distance. A man who escaped and made it back to the shore told them everyone else had been killed, except for the interpreter, Enrique. The betrayal was total. Juan Serrano was dragged to the shore, wounded and tied up, begging his comrades on the ships to fire the cannons to save him. But the terrified crew made the cold decision to save themselves. They weighed anchor and fled, leaving Serrano to his fate. The grand expedition, which had arrived with such power, was now a hunted, terrified remnant. The losses were catastrophic. They had lost their captain, most of their officers, and dozens of men. They were now so short-handed they couldn't even crew their 3 remaining ships. Near the island of Bohol, they made a grim decision. They scuttled it. They set it on fire and sank it, a floating funeral pyre for their failed ambitions in the Philippines. The 2 remaining ships, the Victoria and the Trinidad, limped away from the archipelago that had promised so much and delivered only ruin. Magellan's entire project had collapsed in a storm of blood and betrayal. The journey from celebrated god to hunted fugitive was complete. Conclusion: the ghost of Ferdinand Magellan never really left that beach on Mactan. His body was never recovered. His grand vision for a Spanish, Christian Philippines died with him, a bloody failure that delayed Spanish colonization of the islands by 44 years. It wasn't until 1565 that another expedition, led by Miguel de Legazpi, would finally succeed in establishing a permanent Spanish settlement, and, even then, it was built on careful negotiation and a much clearer understanding of the region's politics. Magellan's downfall wasn't the result of one bad decision on one bad day. It was a rapid cascading failure born from a single, fatal flaw: blinding hubris. He arrived in the Philippines not as a diplomat, but as a man who believed he was an instrument of destiny. He completely misread the culture he encountered. seeing its people not as strategic players with their own ambitions, but as souls to be saved and subjects to be claimed. He mistook political maneuvering for spiritual conversion and hospitality for submission. And most fatally, he believed that his technology and his faith made him invincible. That assumption led him to wade into a battle he didn't understand, against a people he didn't respect, in a place he didn't know. Ferdinand Magellan is remembered for the voyage that first circled the globe, a feat that reshaped our understanding of the world. Yet, he himself didn't complete it. He died halfway there, a victim of his own arrogance. The story of his final 42 days offers a more intimate, and maybe more important, lesson. It's a brutal, cautionary tale of how quickly power can evaporate, and how the line between a god and a ghost can be perilously thin. The fall of powerful figures is a recurring tragedy throughout history. What other historical downfalls do you find most compelling, and what lessons do they hold? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want to explore more stories of ambition, ruin, and the forgotten corners of our past, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell.